Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Frontline update for the 4th of March 2023. We're going to go and just have a little look at the beginning of the Institute for the Study of War daily report because it talks about Bakhmut. And just to mention that really it appears to be all about Bakhmut at the moment. That Ukraine appears to be setting conditions for a controlled fighting withdrawal from parts of Bakhmut. I will talk about that in more depth as I get to Bakhmut. There has also been mentioned that there's a large offensive brewing. In fact, this is based somewhat on the Institute for the Study of War interactive map, but some analysts are saying that there appears to be a big offensive in Avdiivka. I'm not wholly sure about that, but again, we'll get to that when we get there. We're going to start in the northeast sector. That's Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina front line. So up here. And there is some news in the Hrenikivka area here. So as we come down, Dvorichna, with an A, Dvorichnet with an E. The latter has been captured by the Russians over the last few weeks, and Hrenikivka has also been taken by the Russians. War Mapper, but I can't find any other confirmation of this, so it's odd that this has popped up from on War Mapper because they're not usually the most current, as in minute by minute sort of things. Saying that the Ukrainian presence has returned to Hrenikivka. The settlement is once again contested after being occupied by the Russians on the 19th of February, and they walk you through to Hrenikivka here. So that's again all I've heard. There is in the ISW, if we look at their Luhansk sort of area, I know this goes up to Kharkiv, there is a lot of talk about forced or mandatory evacuation of vulnerable civilians from Kupiansk. In fact, this has been mentioned in mainstream media. You can read this on BBC, whatever websites to talk about Kupiansk, people being taken away from there. Again, because it could be under threat from this offensive, if indeed it is that, and a move down through Sinkivka. The ISW says Ukrainian Luhansk Oblast head Sergei Haidai has reported. No, actually, that's not what I wanted to say. Sorry. So, a Russian source has claimed that Russian troops have advanced in the Sinkivka area, and amplified claims made by Luhansk People's Republic officer Andrei Morochko that civilians are leaving Kupiansk en masse in advance of Russian offensive operations near the city. So, you might get some movement here. The Sinkivka, various claims. Defmon, for example, has that under Russian control, but no one else seems to have it under Russian control. And I don't think it is at all. But there could be this a move towards Kupiansk. We will have to see whether that offensive amounts to anything up there. As far as for the rest of the area, the ISW says Ukrainian Luhansk Oblast head Sergei Haidai, I'll get there eventually, reported that Ukrainian forces struck a Russian equipment column near Svatova on the night of March the 2nd to 3rd, causing Russian forces to suffer substantial equipment losses in the area. I've checked out his Telegram post on that. It's not got any explicit details any more that I can give you on that. Haidai also noted that Russian forces in the Kremina area are increasingly resorting to heavy equipment such as BMPT terminators because they have been unsuccessful in conducting effective small group attacks. So that's quite interesting that the idea that they are using a big piece of equipment isn't so much that they are on the offensive, it's that their other forms of offensive didn't quite work as well. So as we come further down south through past Svatova, really not a lot of news along this whole front line, and it hasn't really been for a week. I have moved my map a little bit in line with Deep State Map here, who has actually the Ukrainians having either regained or it's a retweaking the map south of Ploshchanka, an area around here where they appear to have a bit of in this wooded area there, a bit of ground, whilst also losing a tiny bit of ground, really, just the odd field up near north of Ploshchanka, actually. Sorry, my fingers aren't very good today. Here in this area, and I've actually adjusted my map to show that they appear to have Novovodyanye there, the Russians under their control, but in real terms, not a lot of change, a bit of to and fro. Um, but you would expect more, considering this appears to be one of their main areas of offensive, the Russians, but not too much to report. If we go to Defmon, so his first entry is going to Bilorivka and Spirna south of Kremna. So there's absolutely nothing for that northern line, that northern axis. So we'll come down to Bilorivka, Spirna, which is just there. And actually, I've got some footage of Spirna. It's not a huge amount to report. But yeah, just before we get there, let's go back to Defmons, who says, yeah, if you repulse attacks in the area of Bilorivka, Spirna, and Vasilkivka, yeah, not a huge amount of detail, not much to report home. There's some footage just coming out saying the Security Service of Ukraine claims the destruction of 8 units of enemy equipment in one night, 5 tanks, 2 infantry fighting vehicles, and an ammo truck. I don't know whether that is... Oh, there's no snow there. I'm not quite sure where this is, whether this is up near Svatova, in the Luhansk area, as Sergei Haidai is claiming, or whether this is further down south. I'm just not sure. Trying to get to the bottom of that, but quite a bit of equipment has been taken out according to that footage. And if we now go to look at the Spirna claims, now I don't know whether anything particular is going on in Spirna, so no reports here. The pro-Ukrainian source says damage an abandoned Russian tank T-80 BV near the village of Spirna in the Donetsk region, and then goes on to say more from Spirna, 3 BMP-1s taken out there. I don't know whether that is a specific encounter that has taken place in Spirna, or whether it's sort of general destruction that you can that can be seen around there. As we come further down south to Bakhmut, you have your general overview. I think Defmon gives a pretty decent one here. Like, yeah, if you repulse attacks in the area of Vasilkivka, Orikov Vasilivka, Dubovo Vasilivka. So these are all these places up in the northeastern area. Huryohivka, Bodanivka, and Bakhmut itself does have a blue arrow regaining territory in the south near Ivanivska. And so there are different sort of mapping representations of what is going on down there. If you look at my map, those sort of places that he's talking about are in the under Ukrainian control, but there are pressures towards there. Orikovo, Vasilivka, Hurivka there, and also this place here that I have under Russian control as per Syria maps, but Defmon is talking about, and Deep State map do not have this under Russian control, which is Dubovo Vasilivka. So it could well be that could well be a contested settlement, as I've said on the previous days. Syriac maps has a kind of synopsis of what's going on. So before we look at the bridges that have also been talked about a lot. So Syriac map says Ukrainian army has withdrawn from the eastern bank of in Bakhmut. Yeah, and Russian army have begun combing operations to clean the area from remaining troops. In addition, Ukrainians began withdrawal from the rest of the city from secondary roads after Russians got fire control over the main supply routes. He's talking about the road through Kromova and the T0504 south through Ivaniska. He is claiming here that they have been interdicted, so that the Ukrainians are using the smaller roads to get out of Bakhmut, at least according to him. So let's go and look at the ISW claims. Geolocated footage posted on the 3rd of March shows Ukrainian forces destroying a bridge across the Bakhmutivka River in northeastern Bakhmut and another bridge across the Kromova-Bakhmut route west of Bakhmut, suggesting that Ukrainian troops may be preparing to conduct a controlled withdrawal from parts of Bakhmut. Okay, let's go and look at that. So we have, this is the bridge that he's talking about across, or the ISW is talking about across the Bakhmutivka River. Just a small bridge. You can see it's not a huge river, this, but if you're trying to get mechanized equipment across there, it becomes a little bit of a difficult obstacle. And if you're sort of charging with in a human wave there, that's still going to be a pretty difficult obstacle. So if you can get behind that, then you've got a natural barrier for your troops. Um, War Monitor said Bakhmut operations continue, which require informational silence at this moment. Heavy battles continue on the northwest sector of the front line as large assaults are taking place in order to physically cut the roads to the west. So this is this road coming in here through Kromova, and the northwest there. But this is the site of heavy fighting. I have a more kind of maximalist Russian bit of mapping there, where this is the worst case scenario. Russians have that amount. Obviously, it could have changed already. They are halfway through fighting today, but it's all about this road that's effectively um, under fire control of the Russians, and this road to the south. Although there, I did read a claim that if you drive really quickly, it's it's all right. Those roads are actually usable. I don't know how reliable that is. And then we come to the sort of north, to the east, and to the south, and to the southwest. You've almost got sort of, well, and then the northwest as well. So you've got almost like 6 areas maybe to consider Bakhmut. The ISW says one Russian source has claimed that Wagner forces broke through the Ukrainian defenses in Ivaniska and are threatening the western outskirts of Bakhmut from the Ivaniska area, but there's no corroboration for that claim. Indeed, so that would be here, some kind of breakthrough of the lines here. I have, again, the kind of maximalist Russian mapping there. People like Deep State will have, I will draw you the line. Yeah, they will have the front line looking more like that, and indeed around here, more aligned to the canal there. So it depends who you go to, and as you saw from the Defmon map, that there is a claim of some kind of Ukrainian counterattack coming down there. So it could look a little bit different to the southwest here, but I wonder how long the Ukrainians will be hanging on to territory to the west of the Bakhmutivka River, considering the river comes down there, and bridges have been blown, or one bridge has been blown there, one bridge has been blown on this road, I think. So it does look like an operational withdrawal is taking place to some degree, or at least not necessarily an operational withdrawal, and certainly a withdrawal to the west of the Bakhmutivka River. The ISW, in their discussion at the beginning of the daily report, say Ukrainian forces appear to be setting conditions for a controlled fighting withdrawal from parts of Bakhmut. Russian forces have been fighting to take Bakhmut, a city with a pre-war population of roughly 70,000 people, since roughly May 2022, and have suffered devastating casualties in the process. Geolocated footage posted on March 3rd confirms that Ukrainian troops have destroyed 2 critical bridges in the Bakhmut area, one across the river and one along the Kromova-Bakhmut route just west of Bakhmut. The preemptive destruction of the bridges is likely an indicator that Ukrainian troops may seek to inhibit Russian movement in eastern Bakhmut and limit potential western Russian egress routes out of Bakhmut. Ukrainian presidential advisor previously stated on the 28th that Ukrainian forces could choose to pull back from positions in Bakhmut as needed, but they have fortified the area west of Bakhmut such that even if the Ukrainian troops begin to withdraw, Russian forces would not necessarily be able to rapidly take the entire city, um, so on and so forth. As I mentioned yesterday, it is this area on the higher ground to the west of Bakhmut where the Ukrainians will be taking up positions. So it's not like they would completely withdraw into Krasny Yar and have another Bakhmut straight away. Although it will be reminiscent of Bakhmut, because the Russians will attempt to encircle Krasny Yar in the same way they've done to Bakhmut. But they have the advantage, the Ukrainians here, of higher ground that could give the Russians pause for thought. So it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out in Bakhmut, whether there will be a full scale withdrawal or whether they will still keep trying to hold the land, the main city really, to the west of the Bakhmutivka River, and whether they are going to be trying counterattacks to the south to allow them to be able to use the T-0504. But of course, that all becomes rather pointless if they can't hold the north and the northwest here. So it remains to be seen whether they are going to do any counterattacks in this area to allow them that breathing space, or whether this kind of closing neck of the bag will spell the end for resistance in Bakhmut. But having said that, there are areas where they have, they've stopped the Russian progress. So particularly in the north, they've stopped it, and in elements here around the northeast, the east, the Russians appear to have made good ground. Syriac maps, as I say, has shown that these two roads appear to be interdicted. According to them, the Ukrainians are pulling back behind the river, and that they are escaping through the smaller roads. But we'll have to see whether that is the case. And we're going to go finally to Null Reports, the pro-Russian um, source that says, on the map, Bakhmutivka River will act as a new line of defense, kind of what I was saying. North Bakhmut, the advance around Stupki seems to have stopped, and the breakdown west of the Bakhmutivka River seems to act as a natural barrier. Around Bakivka, it was also relatively quiet today, mostly artillery. I'll show you some of that in a second, but described by soldiers at the front as less than the last days. In the east, the situation seems clear. The Ukrainians takes a rack on the other side of the Bakhmutivka River. I don't know what that means. It takes positions and has probably withdrawn from the eastern part of Bakhmut. There's been no official confirmation, but if you follow my post the last few days, it won't come as a surprise. And little has changed south. No news today. Today I got told that both the road through Kromova and the T0504 towards Konstantinivka are quite usable. So here is the source of that, actually. Although troops just have to drive a little faster than normal, given the fact that it's within Russian artillery range. So that's all quite interesting. This is some footage coming from either the Hryokivka or the Bodanivka area in the northwest. So that's going back out to here. This is a view either towards this settlement or this settlement, I'm not wholly sure, from somewhere up here from the Russian point of view, showing it gives you an indication of the kind of artillery and mortar pressure that is being put on these settlements. Just lots of explosions. I mean, I don't know whether there's NLRS involved there as well, but they are certainly being hammered. Although no report said quieter yesterday than on previous days. So, take your pick as to who you're listening to and what you believe of the area. It is nonetheless difficult in Bakhmut. So if we now finally come out of Bakhmut, further down south, past Shumi and New York, towards Avdivka, although the Institute for the Study of War doesn't report on any major offensive taking place, their map does have a claimed ground here. It looks rather like this. So their interactive map has a lot of yellow, which is Russian claims that are not necessarily confirmed, or that the ISW assesses that the Russians actually control. So where it's in the darker color, in the red, that's assessed to be under control of the Russians. So you can see that a little bit north near Kamyanka, although the Ukrainians have taken some back there. And then really down the road, so down this road, and I have an area taken back there. So there are disagreements, but there are some Russian claims that there's quite a bit of ground that's been taken here. But they don't mention that particularly in their daily report. So it could be that mapping is more recent than this compiled daily report that gets done the night before. So this daily report was done last night. So geolocated footage posted on March the 3rd indicates that Russian forces may have made incremental gains near Vodyani. So Vodyani is there. They might have made a tiny bit of gain going further west along there, and they have made some gains over there over the last week. But with regard to this, I'm just not sure what's going on. Whether this is definitely a scene of an offensive. I mean, it'd be quite bizarre. Well, I don't. Maybe it's not. I mean, as I said earlier, they need to take Avdiivka and Bakhmut to take Donbass. So absolutely has to be taken if that is the intentions of the Russians. There are claims just coming out now about. So this is in the Avdiivka direction. Russians went on the offensive with 5 tanks and 10 IFVs. The 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the Presidential Brigade, together with 55th Artillery and 110th Mechanized Brigades, eliminated 3 of the Russian tanks, 5 IFVs, and 5 Russian soldiers were captured. So you have. It looks like. I don't know whether these Russians are turning around and retreating, but there's a lot of destruction going on for these Russians. If there was an offensive, and if this is timed to that offensive, if this is footage over the last 24 hours, this has just come out. As far as I can see, I haven't seen this footage before, and it is now hitting the socials. So it does seem that this is in the last 24 hours. So it could be that there's a Russian offensive, and it could be that at least part of that offensive has been like taken out quite badly in the area. I was then trying to check for more information. Just found this. This is a thread about Russian losses during the Avdiivka offensive. This is, I think, over the whole of the winter. Someone's compiled all the losses. Certainly recent ones. I mean, this is all in. So there's a bit that looks like it wasn't so recent. I don't know about the greenery there, but someone has counted up sort of 60 odd pieces of equipment taken out. And it says there are many other losses in the summer and the autumn that do not appear here. I will look for them and I'll update the thread. So basically, the only reason I'm telling you this is Avdiivka seems to have been over time uh, the scene of a considerable amount of equipment loss because it's just somewhere that gets reported on daily. You kind of almost don't realize how much attrition is taking place. It's like, oh, they've made a little bit of a gain here, they made a little bit of a gain near Opitny, and they've lost a little bit, and you kind of like go on. And but then when you add up all of this over time, that's a significant amount of capacity of mechanized equipment that has been taken out of the war in Avdiivka. So yeah, I think that's just worthy of note. Okay, let's move on further down south. There's not really a lot of information about Mariinka other than some very vague telegram claims from pro-Russians saying that they're liberating Mariinka, but just interviews with people, no actual footage. So the for example, the ISW very vaguely say Russian sources continued to report on Russian efforts to seize the remainder of Western Mariinka, and those there's actually 3 footnoted references for that, and they're all just really general. So no real information coming out of that. And when we get down to Vuhledar, so let's come out of Mariinka, come down to Vuhledar, and the claims concerning this small, well, I guess it's small geographically, but actually there's quite a lot of apartment buildings there. So it'd be interesting to see what the actual population of that settlement was before the war. But yeah, these high-rise apartment blocks sitting on this uh, higher ground overlooking Pavlivka and Mikilska. There was talk over the last couple of days of the Russians trying to attack coming from the east. So there's this mine to the northeast of Vuhledar, and the Russians may be trying to get purchased there again. It's not for the first time; they have done that previously. ISW says Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed ground attacks in western Donetsk, but when it comes to Vuhledar, the General Staff reported that Russian forces continued unspecified offensive operations in the Vuhledar direction. A Russian source claimed that Russian forces are continuing positional battles in the Dacha area southeast of Vuhledar, and another Russian mill blogger posted footage reportedly of the 40th Naval Infantry Brigade, so these are Marines, elements assaulting Ukrainian positions near Vuhledar. Again, fairly generic, not too much to write home about there. As far as Defmon is concerned, he sort of gives up just south of Avdiivka and then Mariinka. We don't have a lot of information on anything happening in the Zaporizhia area, just normal kind of routine fire, as they call it, which is shelling going on, possibly both ways, but more probably from the Russians. And then Kherson, moving over to Kherson, let's see what the ISW says about that. Turns out the ISW says nothing about Kherson, so there's not really a lot of news to report. There's just a bit of video footage here of a watch point being taken out in the Kherson area on the left bank of the river, which is, as you rivers are always left and right bank in the direction of the flow of the water. So that's actually the east bank. And there's a position taken out near the Antonevsky Bridge. Drones reporting lots of activity there, explosion at night, and there's a thermal camera showing activity of a point there. But again, this is nothing particularly unusual. It's the sort of stuff that's going to be happening on a daily, or in this case, nightly basis. So I just sort of skipped through that to show you there is stuff happening. In fact, talking about Kherson, if you go to my YouTube page and along the top you've got home videos playlists, I'm starting to develop a playlist of recommended Ukraine videos. The here are a few that 3 of these were recommended to me by one person, SK. So thank you for that. And actually, they are fantastic. Um, and I've added just another one in there as well. So if we go on to that, the reason I mention these now is because 2 of these are relevant to Kherson itself. So one of them is on assignment with Richard Engel, Ukraine's Secrets Resistance, a really good NBC documentary, just absolutely fascinating. I advise you watching that. Watch it on 1.75 speed if you don't have enough time. Always watch things quicker. That's my hint to the world. And then the other one that's relevant to Kherson is another it's a fantastic bit of documentary making or reporting, really, from France 24. It's in English, and it's again talking about the resistance in Kherson during the Russian occupation. So you have, a violinist, a philosophy graduate, a fisherman, all these people working to do what they can in terms of taking out the Russian occupation. And then, in fact, once they'd retreated from Kherson, I showed you video footage of an attack on a base the other side of the river and retreating boats under heavy machine gun fire and I think mortar fire and all sorts. And there were claims from the Russians that 2 boats were sunk, and there are claims from the Ukrainians and not the case. Well, actually, they've got the French film crew were there for that, and filming the people operating on the other side of the river doing the drone footage and stuff. So it's fascinating. You get to see exactly, well, not exactly, but largely what happened in that whole incident. I really, really recommend watching the France 24, Ukraine's shadow soldiers meeting resistance fighters in Kherson region. And then a third one for you is a really fascinating look again at viewpoints of people in Russia. This is a Sky News report, documentary Russia at War, Putin's Home Front, and the variety of views and how many of these people really do suck up the narrative and the strong nationalistic thread that is woven through society in Russia. Just again, that's a really good documentary. So I advise you to go and check on my recommended Ukraine videos watch list, and you'll see a bunch of stuff there to do a bit of homework. Spend your day doing stuff like that. Those 3 are fascinating. And the 4th one I got on there was a TED talk from a few years back of some guy who calls himself Putin's #1 enemy. It's also well worth watching. Okay, so that's to say, not a lot going on in Kherson. And as I said in my news update, everywhere in all of the occupied regions, you have a huge amount of defensive construction taking place. And I showed you these 2, just gives you an idea of the kind of work they're putting in. This is in Crimea, and proper wooden trenches being built on the beaches on the coastline there. And here, this video gives you a real indication of what the coastlines are starting to look like. It's scrolling through latest satellite imagery. You can really see that they are making the coastline look like the defences of Normandy in the Second World War prior to the D-Day invasion. So it's quite incredible how much work the Russians are doing in defensively, and that's wise. This will present an obstacle for the Ukrainian forces. I'm not saying that they would make amphibious landings on Crimea, but up and down the occupied region, we are seeing a huge amount of fortification, particularly along the front lines, as in it's not too much behind the front lines. There are several layers though, but when you start getting down to Zaporizhia Oblast and Kherson Oblast, those and Crimea, those defenses are really deep. They go a long way back and they surround certain towns. Like I think Tokmak, for example, is surrounded by defenses and all sorts. So things will be difficult for Ukrainian counteroffensives when they do happen, if they will try and make inroads into particularly this southern region. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. And thank you for all your support. Really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll speak to you later.